I want to go over to Anya and Janet. I want to bring you in here as well. On the topic of protests, I know that you were talking about cynicism in America. And I think that in the last few months, certainly since the death of George Floyd, I think that we have seen a lot of activism and participation, at least in the civic process, by a lot of really young people. In fact, I think that these protests have been seen as the largest civil rights movement or gathering in American
Mhm.
history by number of participation. Now, I wanted to ask both of you, I'm curious to hear your perspectives. Do you think that this movement will really increase voter turnout, or do you think that unfortunately we may go back to the status quo as it comes to voting?
I'm pretty hopeful, honestly, that it will increase voter turnout because I've never seen, like, for reference, I went to a lot of protests in Tampa and around Florida. I have never seen young people in my community be so active in representation. I've never seen them go out of their way to have difficult conversations, register to vote. Like my friends are actually registering to vote, which I never thought that they would do. Some of them are very cynical. I had a hard conversation with my friend who said he doesn't believe in voting. And people are changing their opinions. Like they're actually starting to alter their mindsets and care about issues bigger than themselves. And I think also as a whole, the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that have been going on have shown people that voices do matter. I think in the past it was easy to believe that my actions aren't actually going to change anything. But seeing different states start to defund the police department, I feel like that's inspiring younger people to acknowledge the power that their voice has. And I'm really hopeful. I mean, Janet can probably talk more about the voting side, but I'm hopeful that it will actually increase voter participation.
Sure. Yeah, Janet,
Yeah,
what are your thoughts?
I think that they're like, I know I just mentioned the cynicism, and that can obviously be a terrible thing when there's an overload of cynicism where you just don't trust the government and you don't believe your vote matters. But there's also, it's kind of an oxymoron to say, but like a good thing to cynicism, especially in young voters, because it's like this belief of, nothing's getting done. And like, it's like
Mhm.
our time where like we
Mhm.
have to fix this because it's just like so messed up to the point where we have to kind of tear apart the system piece by piece is kind of like the radical young person's perspective that was created, just by decades of inaction. So I do think that there's like the negative and the positive part to the cynicism that we're seeing right now in America. And I also, like Anya, am pretty hopeful about what this means for the future of our democracy, not just, getting people elected that align with my beliefs, but just overall getting people out to the polls and really making it so that every voice is represented.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It's the like fine, I'll do it myself kind of mentality.
Yeah.
They
It's like,
see they see like, yo, oh my god, this is so messed up. I guess it's my turn, right? But
Might as well step
um
in.
yeah.
right. I mean, there's a bunch of questions with like regards to how cynicism is carried out in different demographics, right? Obviously, for
Mhm.
young people, it could entire. I would agree. It could entirely be like this driving force of
Mhm.
I hate it so much here that I'm gonna change it.
Yeah.
um,
Like,
but like when I'm thinking though, like the different age demographics, potentially like the
mhm.
middle age voters or the older age voters, they may respond to cynicism with a less
Yeah.
driving zeal, so that's also an interesting aspect. I did want to, so to speak, I guess, throw an engine into the wrench here because I wanted to know your guys' thoughts on protesting as like a effective tool for promoting change. And I'm approaching this from a purely objective standpoint because a few weeks ago, I interviewed I had a conversation with this person who founded this nonprofit called Civics Unplugged, and he was very strongly opposed to protesting as like a civic tool. And instead for his nonprofit he focuses on media, and he focuses on how students can employ media
Mhm.
and creative projects to advocate. And I agreed with some aspects of his argument, others not. I do think that protesting itself holds like an important value in terms of like a rallying cry and at least a physical representation of
Mhm.
distress and obviously dissent. But I mean, obviously, Anya, you yourself have been a part of a protest. Janet, I don't know if you have, or if you have.
No.
So yeah, I mean, for you guys, I'm sure you have. For you guys being a part of it, looking back, how was effective do you think your efforts were in that sense, and potentially do you see protesting as like the frontier in which we should approach change, or some other alternative avenue? That was a long question. I'm sorry.
I mean, I can start off. I think protesting is a really beautiful way to raise awareness and to show unity. I think it shows a lot of support within a community to see people together rallying for a common cause. But I agree with some points that David just mentioned, in the sense that I feel like if protests aren't matched with civic engagement, they aren't effective. If people don't show up to the polls in local elections, if people don't vote, then there's no sustained change. It's more just, I would even call it like performance activism,
Mhm.
going to protests and not showing up when it matters to change your government.
That's a great point. I really like that.
Hmm.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I completely agree.
I
And
think.
that was
Sorry, go
kind
ahead.
of like, oh yeah, it's fine. I think that what you said about performance activism, sadly, a lot of performance activism was kind of um, at the forefront of the Black Lives Matter kind of like movement. Although there was actual change, happening with the defunding of the police, moving those resources and allocations, and minority neighborhoods being a little bit less over policed. Obviously, it was varying degrees across the country, but I do want to say that no, protesting should not be the frontier of how we approach civic activism. I think that, like Anya said, it's a display, a physical display of dissent, and it's a way to send a message. It's a way to gain attention. Whether it's not a quote I love, but it very applies here. No press is bad press, where um, I really believe that even the coverage by people who were against the protesting and stuff like that still drew attention to and made people pay attention to the issues that Black and Brown communities were facing with over policing.
Mm. So yeah, that's interesting as well. Like I would say, yeah, I agree. It's perhaps not the best frontier to operate on.
Hmm.
I see it almost like a primordial soup, right? Where the energy is first displayed and grown, homegrown, organic. And the
Hmm.
problem though is, and I think that's the reason why we've seen iterations of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? 2014, 26, like literally 2 year cycles
Yeah.
almost, without ever like truly bringing like important substance to the political theater, which is I think the reason why is because that energy always dissipates, which is really unfortunate to see. It never gets channeled, it never gets focused. I did see, I don't know about you guys, but I did see at the very beginning of the whole movement over the summer, there was like this document circulating that had like seven major reform or demands, so to speak, of police
Hmm.
departments, and I saw that, and like a few weeks later it disappeared, right? So it's like one of those things where protesting is such a formidable like energy source,
Hmm.
but that's just that, right? It's just an energy
Yeah.
source, and
Yeah, I mean,
you.
something that's interesting is a few weeks ago, I found a Wikipedia page that literally had a complete list of all the changes we have seen as a result of George Floyd protests. And what was so interesting was that these weren't just changes within a certain realm or institution, but you saw it across a variety and a diverse array, I should say, of different programs, organizations, companies, educational institutions, and more. And I think that's what's really interesting is that I think that this Black Lives Matter iteration, a continuation of the movement at large, I think really galvanized such a large population that I think we really saw it reach every corner of our society. And the hope, definitely, as you're saying, David, is that we need to be able to sustain this kind of energy. And,
Yes.
and really that comes down to exactly what Anya and Janet have been advocating for, is becoming informed about who stands for your values within your community and ensuring that you're following through with sharing your voice by going and sharing it through the ballot box.